stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. Today's 100th episode of Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will is sponsored by Uchi. Uchi is proud to sponsor this milestone 100th episode about community because Uchi in Japanese means in-group or inner circle. The folks at Uchi believe people are yearning to feel closer to others, not to everyone, but to the people who matter most to them. Uchi is an app that helps make conversations easier. It's like those card games where you sit around a table and share answers to questions, but now it's online, so you can do it anywhere, at any time, and with anyone around the world. It's a free app, and it's available for download on the App Store and Google Play. Download Uchi today, and let's all celebrate our communities together. As an official sponsor of the 100th episode of the Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will podcast, Uchi is contributing to the Elkins Consulting No Longer Virtual 2020 Conference Scholarship Fund. Because this milestone episode is all about community, I reached out to a handful of those people I felt particularly supported by over the years and asked them to contribute a brief voice message to share their thoughts about that word, community, and what it means to them. So before we begin today's episode, I'd love to share those with you. Thank you for listening.
Community, what it means to me, it's not just the people outside my front door, but it's those that are across the world inside of the social universe that I've created a family in. And you are one of those people. I have been with you on this journey now for the last few years, actually almost going on 4 years with No Longer Virtual. And I've seen how you've grown and how a whole community has grown around you. And it's interesting to see the power of your presence, your warmth and caring, and everything you stand for, and how it brings that community around you, and how much we will do for you and lay down our lives for you. It's an interesting thing to see how we corral around any cause you set forward. And so just so you know, I consider you a sister. You are family in my eyes. I've been with you with my children, and they look upon you fondly, as I do as well. Congratulations on this 100 episodes of your podcast. I'm so very proud of you and proud to have you as my friend.
Hi, it's Linda Spiegel. What does our community mean to me? Well, it means that there are people all over the globe who I know are there for me and for whom I try to be there. I've created real friendships with people, and thanks to Sarah Elkins, many of those friendships are no longer virtual.
Sarah, this is Joe Kwan. Congratulations on your 100th episode. Very excited for you and an awesome milestone. Anyone who knows you knows that you know all about community from all your actions and what you do. We often look for happiness in the wrong places. We look for it in material things. If I get a better job, a bigger car, a better body, a nicer spouse. But in actuality, community and the people you surround yourself is really the secret of where our happiness lies. And that's something that I've felt in the communities that you've established, both as part of the No Longer Virtual Conference, as well as your podcast and your LinkedIn groups. The other thing I think is community helps you to be greater and do greater things than perhaps you might do yourself. So one example of that is all the inspiration that you give to others to do things that maybe they wanted to do and they can do, but they weren't going to do it without a little bit of support and nudge. And for myself personally, it was when I was a guest on your podcast, and after doing that, I was encouraged to start my own, which has been a really phenomenal part of my path in the last year or so. So thank you so much, Sarah, for all you do for your various communities. And again, congratulations on 100 episodes. Thanks.
Sarah, our paths crossed when we began supporting each other's work on LinkedIn over 5 years ago. A community of people from a variety of backgrounds across the globe came together and organically formed a community. A few names that spring to mind are John White, yourself, Heather Younger, Karthik, Susan, Chris Spurvey, Milos, Larry Boyer, and a long list of over 100 names quickly joined that community too. But when you created No Longer Virtual, you were able to connect these virtual strangers beyond the keyboard. And in doing so, we got to meet in person, and you created your own podcast. So here we are in 2019. You have 100 episodes and opening up even more opportunities, not just for yourself, but for the community that you helped build. And I will always remember being sat in Denver, Colorado, being completely overwhelmed by seeing so many people whose content I had liked, shared, and engaged with. And suddenly they were stood in front of me and I saw them in the flesh and got such a kick out of that. So what is community to me? I honestly believe that you, Sarah, are the essence of what a community is, because you have authentically and selflessly supported people from all over the world, launched No Longer Virtual, and got those people in one room. And they all not only supported each other, but learned from each other too. So a big congratulations, Sarah, all the way from the UK. Never change. Keep building your tribe, serving your audience, and proving that technology really does work best when it brings people together.
Honestly, I'm overwhelmed at the outpouring of support and encouragement I've received as I've prepared for this 100th episode of the podcast. I am so grateful to those who sent voice messages to talk about how they feel about community, and particularly their thoughts about the community that we've built together. I am so grateful. Thank you. It's the 100th episode of Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Well. And I'm sitting here in the kitchen of one of my best friends on the planet. I call her my soul sister, Twila. Mm-hmm. And we're sitting here with her daughter, Joy, who was on the podcast a few months ago talking about personality assessments and how they can be applied to help us improve our relationships. And my son Max is also here in the kitchen. We're eating delicious banana bread, freshly baked by Twila this morning. And we're here because we had to get Max's wisdom teeth removed. So if you hear some groaning and discomfort, it's because he's still recovering from that. And the reason I wanted to record this episode is that this 100th episode, the theme is community. And for the context of this particular episode, I'd like to define community as the space or the people that share emotional and physical space consistently. So Twila and I met, it must be about 12 years ago now, when you moved to Helena. And at that point, Bob and I had lived there, about 6 or 7 years, and had started to develop our own community, people that we could really connect with at our dinner table. And we started with music. That's how we developed our community and drew you into that community of musicians in Helena. So what I'd love to ask you first is, when you moved to Helena and you were trying to design your community because you didn't really know what you were looking for at that point, what was something that happened that you realized either you were in the right place or you were in the wrong place?
That's a good question. There was a lot going on in my life at the time. I was on the heels of a second move. I had been in Portland for 10 years and then moved to North Dakota for 2 and then moved again to Helena. So with those 2 moves, I left kind of everything got left behind. Church, communities, family. I no longer live near my own family. And friends that I had cultivated in Grand Forks now were no longer able to be part of, I was no longer with them. So I was building from scratch. Mm-hmm. I think that one of the first things I did was look for a church community, and I really struggled that way. And I realized that I was going to have to work harder. That was my old kind of easy in for a community, was to find a local church. And when I could not find one that was jiving with me, meeting you guys was actually the catalyst to begin to look into the greater community at large for support and for community. Yeah. And the friends that you had and that we made through the music that we did together was perfect because they were very like-minded people. Right? They were just as interested in digging deep in topics, say, or creative ventures, full of artists and, potters and painters and singers and musicians, bass players, drummers. I mean, it was just a colorful, amazing group of people. And being part of that, I remember bringing an old friend from high school into that crowd for a party one time. And
I remember that.
Yes,
Jennifer at our house.
Yes. And she fell in love with every single person in that room and was, and afterwards telling me, I can't believe what great friends you have.
After moving, I mean, it's not like you had been there for very long. I love that you tell that story about coming to our house and meeting such a variety of people, partly because there's a podcast episode from probably late last year with Christine Homolka where we talked about not fitting in. And that because she moved around a lot, because she was born in, I think she was born in France and lived in France, but her mother was German and her father was American. And so she never really felt like she fit in. And during this conversation, I realized I never really fit in either. I never had, even going to synagogue, even being raised in a Jewish community, never feel like I really fit that. And so living in Helena, that was the first time I lived anywhere for a long period of time. And I realized that we created our own community because we didn't fit into any one group. There was no synagogue there, not that I would have looked there anyway. But it was when, and we knew a few musicians at that point, and we knew a lot of artists because I was doing clay work at the Clay Arts Guild. But it was when you and Ryan and Hannah at the time, who's now Joy, came into our lives, that we started really making an effort at creating that musical artist community because we would have those music jams at our house.
Yes. And those were vital for me. Helena was rough for me living there. And the music that we create, the time that we spent together creating music and with those people was the thing that made Helena okay for me. And it was amazing. It was an amazing time for me that way. It was very, very important to me, those people in that time.
It was, I look back with such fond memories of those times, even though things were hard financially, things were really, really hard. And, but everything shifted. You moved to Missoula after we had a band together for a couple years and had played a few gigs, and then you moved to Missoula, and we each started our own musical projects.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about how you developed your community here? Any particular moments that you realized that you had created a community similar to what we had created in Helena?
Yeah. Shortly after we moved here, maybe a year and a half into it, I met a vocal teacher and started taking lessons, and he plugged me in with a few of his other students through workshops. And that I would say was akin to what you did for us as well. We started doing music together, and then you're like, here's some other musicians, and we grew that together. But that was the beginning of it. And then immediately I saw those people as this is where I want to go. These people are awake and alive and introspective, and they are who I want to, you
spend time with. And
yes, you start to resemble the people you spend the most time with, and you have to keep that in mind sometimes, to be aware that, like your mother always said, your group will bring you down. You will not bring the group up if that's who you choose. And the group can bring you up if they are those kind of people that you strive towards, you know?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, that's exactly right. And that is kind of the point of talking about community, is that you are a combination of the people that you spend the most time with. And so being intentional about building your community,
Yes.
spending time intentionally choosing those people. And I'm not talking about like-minded necessarily. I'm talking about a diverse community. I have friends who are on the opposite end of the political spectrum from me.
Right.
So it's not a matter of creating a community that looks just like you,
Right.
but being intentional about not creating a community that looks just like you, but that you aspire to spend time with because they bring you up. They make you
Yes.
think.
Challenge me.
Yes.
Call me on my BS. I really, really appreciate that, because personal growth is important to me. And so I have friends that are actually kind of difficult. Sometimes I have a friend, Katie, who's just brilliant. She's a doctor, and she just has a command of so many facts and information. She knows a lot about a lot of things, and she's a feminist. And she challenges me to come out, as a person, and to be unapologetic about who I really am, rather than, as I'm accustomed to in my past, being something of a octopus, where I can change my spots to fit in with what's going on at the moment. And then you can't do that forever.
No.
You lose yourself and you start to resent it. I if you listen to that podcast with Joey, talking about the Enneagram, I have found that a disproportionately large number of my girlfriends are challengers, and I'm a loyalist. And they literally challenge me, and I love it. I love it because they won't let me settle into that comfortable spot of going along to get along.
Right.
Be like, what do you want? You need to know what you want and go for it.
And before I ask Joy and Max to contribute a little bit, I'd like to just briefly talk about an incident that made me realize how important that challenge in those relationships are, in terms of in my youth, I would kind of give up on a friendship if there was an argument. It's why I was a 3-date woman, like 3 dates and then I would be done, because we'd have some sort of conflict and I'd be like, okay, never mind. And I just let it go. Yeah. And I did that with friends sometimes too. If we had any kind of conflict, it would just fizzle the relationship. And my father had passed away, and I grieved him in my way. And then when your father passed away, you had a little bit of notice and you drove to Portland. And you had told me via text that you just missed him, that he had passed just before you could get there. And I said, well, it's probably better that way. And that was coming from my place of, my father did not die a peaceful death. And I'm really glad that I wasn't by his side when it happened, because it wasn't peaceful. And I know that it would have damaged my experience of his death more than helped. And that's where it was coming from. And you didn't respond for a while. And then one day you asked, it was a day or two later, you asked if we could talk on the phone. And I said, yeah, of course. So we talked, and you said, I need to clarify something. When you said this, what did you mean? Because it really hurt me.
What you said was, your response was, it seems ideal to me.
Oh, seems ideal to me.
And so my question for you was, when you say ideal, what do you mean? Because it didn't feel ideal to me, is what I said. And you said, right. You immediately were like, yes, I see that feels ideal to me. But we weren't talking about my relationship with my dying father.
Right.
And you immediately understood. It was perfect. I was glad that I brought that up. And I didn't want to alienate you, which is why I asked you to tell me.
Which it could have, and that's what I keep coming back to is a real friend, a true friend, that when there's that question, that they ask it in a question form. They don't say, wow, you really hurt my feelings when you said that, unless that's a good thing too. But to be able to say, what did you mean by that? Because I know your intention wasn't to hurt my feelings.
I totally knew that.
Yeah. And for some reason, that incident, that conversation, we were living 2 hours apart, so we didn't see each other that often. And yet that conversation always comes back to mind when I think about what real friendship looks like.
Aww.
Always.
Yeah.
Because afterward, I didn't feel estranged. I didn't feel insulted or criticized. I felt, if anything, I felt closer to you, that you felt like you could ask me that and not just dismiss it as, well, she didn't mean to hurt my feelings, so I'll just let it go. Which is, what we do a lot of times.
But it's more fair. It is. And Joy's been teaching me that. It's more fair to say, you know what? That doesn't sit right with me. Let's talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than, I'm just going to let, and then the other person never realizes that they caused even a small amount of damage to the relationship or to the person.
And it's those little bits of damage that add up.
Right.
I mean, it's never one big thing.
Right.
We were just talking about that, how the end of a relationship is rarely an on-off switch. It's much more likely to be a dimmer switch, where you slowly but surely get small cues, small clues, where the light is coming on and coming on. It's just that last incident that turns it on full bright, where the light comes on bright. But very few relationships end with a light switch.
Several moments of misunderstandings can turn into, this person just doesn't understand me.
Exactly.
So, that investment of time and energy to say, I'm not understanding you right now. Can you help me?
Exactly.
Can prevent it from turning into, she doesn't understand.
And in some cases, we talked about before, being really intentional about the community that you build and the people you spend time with. Or if you say that and the answer isn't really conducive to a relationship, then you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's just as important.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Joy will agree with that is just as important. So Joy's been sitting here patiently and quietly. Mm-hmm. And the reason I would like to ask Joy her contribution on her definition of community and how she builds it is because you are such a solo spirit. Mm-hmm. Not only as an only child, but in general, I would call you a solo spirit, even though you process externally, which I love.
Oh, I like that, process externally. That's a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you process externally with intention now, and who you choose to process with. Mm-hmm. So talk to me about your community and what you kind of think about this whole conversation.
Well, I'm glad that you're the one who pointed out that I was kind of a loner spirit, because I was about to cast doubts over how qualified I felt to talk about community for that very reason. Mm-hmm. But interestingly enough, I do have something to say, because community is what makes the difference, especially for my personality type, between health and complete disintegration. The moment that I start deciding that, people are unsafe, I should withdraw, I should, take measures to protect myself, is the moment that I start becoming, paranoid and violent-minded and self-rejecting and dehumanizing.
Wow.
Yeah.
But it's a slippery slope.
It's the worst. And it's all about solitude, just because, people are the natural danger source in the mind of a challenger. And so if we start avoiding them, then they seem more and more dangerous, and we invest so much attention and emotional involvement with every encounter, when if you're just, the best thing for me was going to Spain and hostel hopping by myself, because then I was on average meeting about 7 new people a day, and I didn't have a single friend to act as a buffer, and I was living in a bunk in an 8-person room usually because that was the cheapest. So I was co-mingling with complete strangers and a cycling number of complete strangers on a daily basis. So, very hellish for my introverted side, but, well, it very quickly revealed which things were, society always makes me feel this way, and which things were, I always make this happen. Because I started having the same fight with the same guy, only it was a different guy in a different country over and over again. I'm like, wait a minute, maybe
there's one thing in common here.
Exactly. Maybe not all 5 of these guys are total sexists. Maybe I'm sensitive. Oh, wow. So my whole persona fell apart in milliseconds, really, but that was good because it was an unhealthy persona based on keeping people at arm's length. So, community itself, not even necessarily, being discerning about the people within it, to an extent, of course, but community in general means health for me. But community in general is terrifying for me all the same. So it's weird to now be trying to expand professionally and get involved in social media in an actual way where I'm actually trying to make something happen. And the more people pay attention to me, the more that I want to pull back and try to be cool. But they like you better if you're just right there, and
especially if you're a coach. That's kind of important.
Give up any thought of self-protection. That's just the rule for me these days. But it's the opposite of what I would naturally do if I didn't know that it was the thing for me.
So when you think about your moves, because you were just little when you moved from Portland to Grand Forks.
Right,
10, and so not so little. Mm-hmm. And then Grand Forks, you were there until you were in middle school, and then moved to Helena, and then to Missoula, your senior year of high school. Is that right? Junior year of high school?
Sophomore.
Sophomore year. Okay.
So it was just a few 2 or 3 years at a time when I was
right.
Yeah.
So, do you think that when you look back at certain incidents, with our family or with a friend, do you ever think about how that impacts your vision of community?
Well, to me, moving and cycling through people never gave me that much stress, especially since I, didn't really care if anyone was hanging out with me to begin with. If I could just sit in my room and play with my toys, that was a day well spent.
Right.
I would miss particular best friends at times, but it was all. I was used to the cycling, and then used to attending fresh churches every once in a while, and so having that, that variety in community, those were vastly different in some cases. I always was a passenger, as you are as a kid, but even more so, I feel, in a community vibe. I've always been, passive and paying attention and highly confused until I got old enough to figure it all out.
Which you'll continue to do well into your 80s, I would assume. Something you said kind of triggered a thought for me. People who move around a lot get to be exposed to a lot of different kinds of community.
Right.
In a way that people who are born and raised in the same place or stayed in a place for a really long time didn't get that exposure.
And so that predisposed me to travel, come to think of it.
Yes, and it probably predisposed you to observation of community in a way that you couldn't from the inside.
Right.
And I'm thinking about that because we have 2 in this room. Joy and I both moved around a lot. I went to 4 different elementary schools. And then Max went to the same school, same group of friends since preschool. And now he's in college a couple hours away from home and is still living with one of his best friends, but has been exposed in some ways to lots of different communities because we never really, even in the 20 years in Helena, never really joined any one community. And then Twila was raised in a very rigid, structured community until you left home at 18 and then exposed yourself to a variety of communities. So Max, let's start with Max. Do you have any thoughts about that? Like, what just popped into your head when I described you being in school with the same kids, growing up in the same community, which is Helena, and you've kind of created your own community outside of our family. So do you think about that at all? I mean, is that something...
I just think that I'm really lucky that it's like I was blessed by, well, I'm not sure blessed is the right term, but I went to an elementary school and met like 5 of the people I still hang out with today. And it was just like, these were all really like-minded, and we're lucky to have found each other when we did. But I feel like traveling a lot and being part of different communities in high school, middle school, and just like learning who I was really nice. And just always having that back base be there.
Oh, that totally makes sense. You had a foundational community that gave you the confidence to be able to explore other kinds of community.
Yes.
I would also add that you and Bob have always welcomed new people into your home and into your lives, inviting them in. Everywhere you travel, you meet new people and invite them. You have musicians from California coming to stay with you and things like that. Well-known musicians from parts of the country coming to stay with you. And there's an incredible influx of new vibes and energy for your kids. I'm sure that is part of the thing.
Absolutely.
So have there ever been negative consequences of that? Like, I think about just twice where people we invited into our home, we had to disinvite into our home. It only happened twice, but those were, they had a big impact on me and how I think about our home. Do you have any thoughts about that? Do you remember that, Max?
I don't remember it entirely, but I don't think it's impacted my life as significantly as has yours. Because I've just seen these people and seen them left. I didn't really imagine what time or what day they'd be leaving, and then unexpectedly they'd leave, and then me being like, "Oh no, they left."
Oh, right. So it wasn't necessarily grieving something.
No, definitely not. But I don't think that's impacted me very much. I feel like just having the steady cycle of people and always being able to have my room ready or be able to set up the TV room for people to stay was just a big part of it.
Oh my gosh, I hadn't thought about it that way. The impact on your physical space.
Yeah. Which is so important as you're going up your own room, your room space. As an adult, we have the house.
Right.
As a kid, it's my room. Wait,
right.
That's my place.
And Max had to give it up sometimes. I mean, there were times where he knew he had to keep his room clean in case somebody came to visit. So do you think that shifted anything for you, or it was just part of your life?
Part of my life.
He's ruined.
Yeah.
He'll never have his own space again.
Neat and tidy, a young man.
That's funny.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when, because I spent the first 8 years of my life in Haiti, and my parents were missionaries. And one year they sat down and ran the numbers, and we had one night that year where it was just our family of 5.
Wow.
Every other evening, there was someone in the guest room every other night of that year.
Wow.
That's the hostessing family I came with. So I had very similar experience, I think, to yours of, guests and new people all the time, new faces. And
That would be a friendship family.
Yeah.
That was tough for me.
What's really interesting about that is that you see it as an exposure that you wouldn't have otherwise had, because the rest of your life was in small town, way northern Montana, where the whole reason you knew the Canadian national anthem when we performed it was because you got Canadian radio and TV. So that's the middle of nowhere. It really is the middle of nowhere.
And I was miserable.
And you were miserable there.
Yeah, I was miserable.
And maybe part of that was because you had had these 8 years of exposure to a variety of people and foods and experiences. And then you were stuck in this little teeny town where it was the same people all the time in a community you didn't feel like you fit.
Yeah, I did not fit in.
No.
No. The culture was so very different, and it felt like no culture to me.
I think the best part about becoming an adult and being intentional about who you want to be, how you want to transform, and this is definitely speaking to Joy and Max in the frame of young adulthood and transformation from young adulthood into adulthood. And that opportunity that you have to transform, as long as you don't hold on to how people might define you, and being able to say, I'm going to let that go because this is the adult I want to become.
Yeah.
And that's where building your community with intention is so important.
Yes.
Wow. Full circle, huh?
Full circle.
Well, thank you, Twila, Joy, and Max, for joining me on this episode. Any last thoughts, any last stories you want to share?
Thank you for the conversation. You're really good at this.
Thank you. Well, for our listeners, this is the 100th episode of Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Well, and a very special one for me, kind of a big milestone, because as I've mentioned before, consistency is not one of my top strengths or features, and to be able to do 100 episodes on 100 Tuesdays is it's a big milestone for me, and I just so appreciate the community that has helped me create this beautiful experience of meeting new people, talking about really important things, and cherishing and admiring and respecting the stories that people have shared with me over these 100 episodes. So thank you to my listeners. Thank you to the people that I've interviewed. And thank you to my community that has helped me build this on LinkedIn and in person. One of the most frequently asked questions about this podcast is where the intro and conclusion music came from. It's a recording from a practice session in June of 2010 of a band called The Perfect Jones. The song, After You've Gone, was originally performed by Marian Harris in 1918. And yes, that's me singing the melody. As part of this celebration, I'll play the full-length version, which includes Twila Olson on harmonies, Ryan Olson on lead guitar, and Bob Schmidt on rhythm guitar. Enjoy!
Now listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going away? Don't say that we must part. Don't break my aching heart. You know I've loved you truly many years. I've loved you night and day. How could you leave me? Can't you see my tears? Now listen while I say, after you've gone and left me crying, after you've gone, there's no denying, you'll feel blue, you'll feel sad, you'll miss the bestest pal you've ever had. There'll come a time, and don't forget it, there'll come a time, and you'll regret it. Someday, when you've grown lonely, your heart will break like mine, and you'll want me only. After you've gone, after you've gone away. After you've gone, after the breakup, after you've gone, you're gonna wake up, and you will find that you were blind to let somebody come